Some folks will like you and some that just won't. Some that stay real. Some folks will like you and some that just won't. Some that stay real and some that just don't. Trying to fit in will only take you so far. You'll never find home trying to change who you are. So don't spend your whole life trying to be what you ain't. You can't hide your heart with a new coat of paint. You think they'll accept you, I promise they can't. So just be who you are, forget what they think. So just be who you are and forget what they think.
Welcome to Vet with a Mic, content driven by Veterans Issues. So today we are going to talk to a buddy of mine from the Great White North. He's got a lot of cool experiences that he's had within the Canadian military. And we're going to talk a little bit about how Americans and Canadians, although geographical neighbors, their experiences coming out of the uniform are pretty similar as well. Hey, buddy, how you doing today, man?
I'm doing great, man. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, man, the pleasure's mine. I've been trying to get some people from our allies to talk about these type of issues for at least a couple of months now. I had some Australians that were supposed to come on, but we couldn't ever work out the time zone difference because obviously they're on the other side of the planet. But yeah. So let's talk a little bit. Let's just jump right into. Well, first, let me throw a shout out to the Broken Sword people. They sent me this lovely hoodie, and it says Foxtrot Uniform, Charlie Kilo PTSD.
What does that spell out?
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. So they were kind enough to send me a box of their fine products, and I reciprocated, and I sent them a couple of Vet with a Mic t-shirts and a mug, actually. Nice. I think I only sent one t-shirt, but they're good people, and they're Canadians as well. That's the reason why I wanted to give them a shout out.
Oh, right on, man. I'm not tracking them. Okay, cool.
All right.
So let's to the list.
Yeah, let's just jump right into it, buddy. What did you do in the Canadian military?
Oh man, drank a lot of coffee, smoked a lot of smokes. In all seriousness, I left as an infantry officer and spent 15 years, I guess, grinding it out in the reserves here. We can get into what the differences are between a reservist here and a reservist in the States, but deployed in 2010 to Afghanistan with the 10th Mountain Division, 171 Cav actually. So that was an awesome experience. So I spent 8 months in the sandbox, having the time of my life. I'm not being facetious there. I'm being serious. It was a really good experience. I mean, there was the highs and lows of being in a combat zone, but nevertheless, it was one of the highlights of my life before having kids. And from there, I was able to, build myself as a human being. And through the trials and tribulations, being an infantry grunt, figure out who I was. And it was just one of those experiences that I wouldn't trade for anything in the world. And, we can get into all the details of, the nitty gritty of what it's like to be a Canadian troop here and what tour was like for me in due time, for sure.
Yeah. So, a lot of times on this show, we talk about what is the great divide that is transition, right? Because going from the American military to being a civilian again just feels so alienating and ostracizing because you have all these really diverse experiences in the uniform. You see new parts of the world, and then you attempt to, I guess, readjust to going back home, and your whole worldview has just shifted. Nothing feels the same because of just the exposure to different parts of the world that you have. And of course, something that we can talk about in a little bit more detail is the American culture. We have these interactions with civilians that are a little bit condemnation, a little bit adoration, So they'll say, thank you for your service, but then they'll immediately follow up with, so what'd you do? Right. And they ask the jackassy questions like, so did you see any action? Did you kill anybody?
How many people did you kill?
Yeah. And we were kind of discussing this a little bit before about what the veteran continuum is and how there are just so many different experiences that you can have within the uniform that doesn't conform to the Hollywood portrayals that you see in movies. And I think that causes a lot of frustration with civilians because they use those Hollywood portrayals and treat them like gospel.
Right.
And I think that puts us in a weird position as veterans to kind of, well, I guess to not confirm negative stereotypes that we have about veterans who serve, and then to also not diminish the integrity or the image of our brothers and sisters who sacrificed so much before us. And it's just a weird place to be in with interactions with civilians. So I really wanted to see, what are Canadians like in that regard? Do they do the hero worship kind of stuff the same way Americans do? Or is this just a totally different interaction you have with civilians?
It's interesting, and it's a good question. I mean, from my experience, so to go back to when I first joined, give you an idea, we came out of the 90s. It's called the dark era. Like the 90s in the Canadian Armed Forces there was no deployments. There's nobody joining. It was brutal. I joined. So to give you an idea, I joined and we were still wearing like the olive drabs from Vietnam era that you guys, I guess, handed down to us. I don't know. Like I was still sewing on my ranks to my, to my uniform. And although it seemed like we were a ghetto military, we kind of were, we still had excellent non-commissioned officers and we still had excellent training. And we have to always figure it out because we're just lacking. But then Afghanistan kicked off and things really changed. And the reason why I bring that up is because I remember, because I grew up in Montreal. I still live in Montreal and my regiment is in Montreal. You know, I would go show up to my regiment on our parade days on Tuesday nights and sometimes on weekends when we go do training, and I'd be in uniform. And I didn't get it personally, but some of my buddies would get heckled and be like, "Hey, baby killer," and just awful shit. You know, like we're kids, we're 19, and we're just like, "What the hell? What are you talking about, baby killers? What are you talking about?" And our military was coming out of some ugly stuff with what happened in Somalia, which was pretty awful. However, you know, it crushed our airborne regiment. It gave us a really bad name as an army, and because of that, the public got a really negative impression of the military. And so I think that carried over for a while. And so the impression that I got was that civilians have a lot of contempt towards the military. And there was no, other than Remembrance Day, there was no real reason to appreciate the military other than, you know, look at the World War II vets, look at the World War I vets, and let's honor them. And then after that, it's over and done with. Because other than the fact that my grandfather was in the war, my grandmother helped with the war efforts and stuff, there's no real link to the military because there's so few people that are in the military. So I had no reference. I had no point of reference. I didn't know anybody that was in the military. So that being said, once the war started, I noticed there was a big change, like a big change. And that was for the better. People were curious about, you know, what I did. People were worried that I was going to get deployed. I did eventually deploy, but it was on my own volition. And that's when, you know, those weird questions, like when I got back, it's like, "Hey man, like, how was your tour?" It's it never bothers me. If anything, I want people to ask as many questions as possible.
Sure.
I'm not some weirdo. I'm just a regular guy. I just deployed. And part of the reason why I got into podcasting was to convey that message, because so few people understand what it's like for our experience to have an understanding of, like, well, first of all, why would you volunteer to go to a war zone when you had a good life at home? And then what was it like to come home and readjust? And I guess my biggest experience was when I got back, I became a high school teacher, and that's where I got all the interactions with colleagues, but mostly the students.
Sure.
And for me, they're amusing. I'm dealing with 13 and 14-year-olds that have the only context they have of war is playing video games.
Sure.
So, you know, they asked me like how many headshots did I get? Like with no qualms. Like, "Hey, sir, how many headshots?" I'm like, "Are you talking about like me actually killing people by putting a round in their dome? Like, is that what you're saying?" "Yeah, sir. Yeah." Like, that's okay. So I do like a timeout. I'm like, "All right, guys, here, like, this is a teachable moment." And we just have a chat. I'm like, "Look, this is an extremely personal question. Now, I'm not offended. You guys are kids. You don't know anybody.
Yeah,
You never had
yeah.
anybody teach you anything. So like, here's the deal. You don't ask really personal questions to people that you don't really know that well. And even if you do know somebody well, you have to bring them up tactfully. Like, you don't ask really personal medical questions to somebody, or, you know, somebody's going through a divorce or whatever. You learn that through interaction. Well, here's your first interaction. That's not a question to ask right off the bat. It's something that you could potentially ask, but especially me as your teacher, I'm not going to really talk about it, but I'm going to be honest with you guys. No, I haven't killed anybody. But moving forward, when you talk to veterans, which I'm sure you will in the future, don't use that as your opening question. Okay. Just FYI. So be cool about it. And when it comes to the civilian population, I guess the only weird interaction I had since I've been back was I was on this really awesome, it's called the Veteran Transition Network. It's a charity here in Canada that helps veterans transition. It's in the name. And they do 3 weekends, 3 or 4 weekends of group therapy. And I kind of brushed it off. I didn't think it was going to be beneficial. It turns out it was one of the best things I ever did in my life.
Sure.
But we're in a resort area, and there's other groups there too. It's not just us. We're using the dining facility and everything like that. And we started mingling with these other groups, and one of the women from the other groups, they're like, "Oh, who are you guys?" And we're like, "Oh, we're part of the Veteran Transition Network." She's like, "Oh, you guys are all veterans?" Yes. She goes, "Were you in Afghanistan?" I go, "Yes." She goes, "You must be pretty fucked up." I was just like, "Nice to meet you too. My name's Dave. No, I'm not, and I'm doing A-okay. But I guess this was my first really awkward interaction with a stranger, just assuming that I'm fucked up." And
now, how long have you been out of the uniform at that point? Whenever that happened?
So I would have been out for 3 years by that point.
Oh, okay. So probably good for her then that it wasn't in the first year, because I was pretty prickly. I was pretty salty if somebody would have said that to me in what we call here the mourning period, right? Because there's a year, but you just have to form this new self of who you are now outside of the uniform, and you feel all kinds of complicated feelings. If somebody would have came up to me and said that in that moment, I would have probably showed him what fucked up was.
Well, you know,
yelled at him. Yeah,
I'll be honest. Like I say, I was out officially for 3 years, but since I was always a reservist, like I got back in 2011 from my tour, and I kind of puttered around. I did some courses. I wasn't really sure if I wanted to stay full time or quit. And then eventually I just got forced out because I was injured, and that was that. But that whole lead up period, I was checked out like psychologically, and I wasn't really parading very much anymore. And so to say 3 years is probably more like 5. And I kind of lost my identity, I guess. So that whole, prickly kind of period I didn't really go through it in the same sense because I didn't have that mourning period, because I was already straddling the civilian and military world. So it was a bit of an easier like sidestep where I didn't have that cold break. I just got my papers in the mail one day saying like, thanks for your service. You're officially out of the Canadian Armed Forces. Have a good life. And I was like, all right, cool.
So American reservists have described it that way in similar terms as well. We interviewed Scott from the Drive On podcast, who had some time in Afghanistan. Just a really powerful story. His brother and him were both deployed out of reserve units, and his brother was killed in action. And he felt as if the reserves, although you straddle that line, it was pretty unceremonious the way they just let him go, because he used the surviving son clause. And so because his brother was killed, the reserves just let him go. Like, okay, you dropped a chit to get out. Oh, bye. Yeah. And so he felt that it wasn't so much of a polar, sharp contrast between his time in the uniform and civilian, but it still felt disposable, right? Did you feel that? Like, I imagine getting papers in the Canadian or in the mail that says the Canadian Armed Forces, all right, later, have a good life. That still has to leave you feeling some kind of way, right?
I didn't actually. I was happy I got the papers finally at that point. Yeah. But in hindsight, So there was actually me and two of my other buddies were really close at the unit. We're still good buddies, and we kind of made up like a leadership core at our unit for a long time, and we all decided not that I don't think we influenced each other. It was just time. We all had kids, we all had families, we all had jobs, and we're just like, this isn't working out for us anymore. And we all just kind of decided at the same time we're going to leave. Now I was being pushed out. The other two guys weren't. They were just leaving on their own accord. But we had to organize our own retirement party, if you want to call it that, because we knew nobody was going to do it for us. Right. So we're all leaders, and we all did that kind of stuff anyways. So we just organized our own going away party, our own retirement party, and we just, invited our families and our buddies, and we had a few beers and shook some hands, and that was that. And so when it came to like the actual retirement, or I was excited for it in a sense, but also apathetic to it. It was a weird cocktail of emotions, and I was at the point where I just didn't want to deal with that side of my life anymore. I had dissociated myself from a lot of my military friends, from the military. I just wanted to get on with my regular life and not have to think about all that period beforehand, which now I realize was a coping strategy with the issues I was dealing with from my mission, and putting that in a box and saying, I'm not dealing with that anymore. I got kids and I've got a wife and I've got a normal life. That's me now. I'm no longer, LT Dave. I'm just Mr. Morrow. I'm going to sit in my classroom. I'm going to ride out until I get to retirement. And that's my life from now on. And turns out when you put stuff in a box for too long, who is it that said, he's like, it's like putting stuff in the basement, and like they have a gym, like a full like gym downstairs to work out. And that like trauma and that aggression just like gets stronger and stronger and stronger. Then you open up the door to go to the basement to take something, and they just like attack you with like all their strength. That's basically it. It was just like, it got stronger and stronger and stronger the more you didn't look at it. And so then it kind of forced me to have a stronger look at it and unpack that and get after it and get after my own mental health. So that could be where I am right now.
Yeah. A lot of times, because in the American military, we're just so close to each other, right? That your entire social experience revolves around your coworkers. Like, we spend our holidays together. We, spend our time off together. And, you've got this mission first kind of mentality in the uniform. So, you don't want to leave your buddies twisting in the wind. So if you've got an ankle injury, you're going to tough it out and keep going so that your unit or your team doesn't feel the loss. But that leads you to a certain point where, when that's over, you're just another asshole walking around Walmart. There is just this period of, it just hits you like a ton of bricks that part of your life is over. And there's a lot of things that we may have just put on the shelf for a time period. And if we're failing to attend to them, you're right, they don't go away. We may just feel a little less prepared to deal with them the longer we wait. And because it can almost have a cumulative effect in our lives. Whereas if we would have, talked to somebody about these issues sooner, maybe we would have been able to navigate them a little quicker. But I know for me personally, there's nothing wrong. What are you talking about? Like, I'm fine. Yeah. To the point where mama just looked at me and said, no, son, you're different. And you have that kind of watershed moment, quite literally with me, with my mom. Okay, I'm different, mama. Okay. Yeah. Is that something that you can relate to? I mean, is that something that, because, sounds like, even though you were forced out, sounds like you still had that social support around you. But I just went back to my home of record, and it was just like, felt like I was just twisting the wind. I didn't have anybody that I could really connect with anymore, because the people I went to high school with, forget about it. Come on. They don't know what it's like to be in the Middle East. People I went and played sports with, it's the same problem. It's just our worldviews are just totally different now.
Yeah. So the great thing about having my regiment here in my hometown,
Yeah.
was that to this day, 90% of all my best friends were all from the unit. We're all from, we most of us didn't deploy together, but we all have similar experiences, or we trained together and we all drank beers in the mess together. So that never faded. The only weird thing is that all those individuals I was literally overseas with, I don't really have any contact with, and most of them were from the 171 Cav and American military. So other than two that I stay kind of in touch with on Facebook, I don't really have the ability to share those kind of tour stories with anybody. And then I've got some Canadian bros that we're on tour with, but they're not geographically co-located. Like, obviously we got a massive country, so occasional interaction on Facebook. So you don't get to have the same kind of inside jokes, conversations about a mission. It just, so I don't have that. But what I do have is a really strong friend network that never went away, which was awesome. And I lean on it a lot more now than I did when I first got back. I don't know if that makes sense to a lot of people, but essentially like I said earlier, I was really just trying to focus on, get myself a new identity, work on being that teacher, that good husband, that good father, and at the expense of my other relationships. And that wasn't working out well. And now I've learned to get a bit more balance. And I came back essentially to my hometown, but I'm in a metropolitan city. So although all my high school friends have since left, I still have a really good network here of military buddies which is great, because we all have a similar mindset and sarcastic sense of humor and depraved humans.
So that's exactly what I try to encourage people to do. Is, although you're right there with people who are serving directly with you, I encourage people whenever they get out is to find veteran communities to associate with. Because even though your experiences along that continuum may vary, some people may have went to Iraq, some people may have went to Afghanistan, some people may have never deployed at all. Those common military culture elements that you all can relate to are what binds you together. And so you feel more connected. You feel as if you're not as alone outside of the uniform anymore in the veteran identity. So that just exactly echoes what we talk about a lot here, is just include people who are of the military culture, because they understand you better. They relate to you better than the people who have never served will. Right.
The beauty is, like, you don't have to be politically correct, right? You can say whatever the shit you want. It's just like, you're just being an asshole. Like, and you can embrace that inner asshole, and it just feels good, right? And you just get pushback and jokes, and you get your balls busted. It's just that's where I thrive. That's where I really, because people are just being real. It's just that's how I like being, and I don't like having to always watch what I have to say. Obviously, there's a time and place,
Sure.
like in a professional context. Like, I'm not,
especially in the classroom, right?
Yeah, especially in the class. Although later on in the career, I started letting loose a little bit more. I was lucky.
Sure.
I was at a private school, all boys private school, and I paled in comparison to some of the other teachers. So I was like, all right, I'm in a safe place here. I can let fly some F-bombs with my older students when the time is needed. So yeah, I mean, that's another point too. You brought up, work and being in a professional setting. Like, the setting I was in, although teaching is usually pretty conservative, and the school I was at, like, ironically enough, was a Catholic school. It was not that conservative when it came to, like, the permissiveness of what you do in the classroom as a teacher. Like, you could be more yourself, because there's an understanding that you're a human being. These 16-year-olds can get on your nerves. They're basically like they're the same size as men, and they're acting like men, and they're confronting you like a man. So you could confront back, and I like that, because you could just be like, all right, son, I think you just crossed the line, and I enjoyed that because it was more like being an infantry sergeant, which I was previously,
Sure.
you know. So that was a great environment for me. I could have my class do push-ups for you know, misbehaving, and they loved it. I was like, yeah, I was like, this is awesome. So there's elements that I was able to bring back from my military past, and the kids, they liked it because they just never had the experience with anybody that had that kind of military background. So they always wanted a little bit more. So I gave them just a little taste from, you know, from my past experience, which also helped me because it wasn't like a clean break. And I wasn't just working in an office,
Yeah.
like behind a cubicle, like worrying that if I say like shit, I'm going to get like HR up my ass, you know? So that was, I had all like the right conditions to have a good transition. It's just, I didn't take care of myself properly, which is basically what where the, I guess, the break came and the issues came about from.
So let's talk a little bit about what you did to handle that break then, because largely what we talk about here are resources that people have found useful in their life and after the uniform. So whenever you had, let's just say, that disruption, what were the things that you doubled down on to use to help, I guess, find your groove again?
Yeah. So I got on Google. I guess like we get the information that there's programs out there, but things would show up in the mail. I would get phone calls and I'd be like fuck off. I don't need any of this. What are you talking about? I wouldn't know how to like access it. And a lot of times I just assumed that it wasn't really for me because, again, I was a reservist. And I figured, well, you know, my Reg Force buddies, like, they deserve it more. They were in longer. They've got more stuff to sort out.
Sure.
I don't. I'm good. I got a job. I got a wife. I'm good. Until I realized, I'm like, well, things aren't working out so well. Right. I don't know what's going on. I always felt kind of crappy, but I just assumed that that's just life. Hey, you get married, you get a job, you're going to be miserable. Like, that was just what I learned. That's how I grew up. That's what I saw. It's like, okay, well, this is just life. Like, I'm just supposed to be miserable. Like, cool. And my wife loved it, right? Like, she loved me coming home every day just looking like a sorry sack of shit.
Al Bundy every day.
Yeah, right. And so she was really, I guess, because obviously she saw me every day, and she saw me like we met before he deployed, and then after, obviously, we were together, and she saw the difference, and she basically said, like, I'm not going to spend the rest of my life with somebody that like you that's just miserable all the time. You got to go fix something. I don't know what you have to fix, but go fix something. And I was like, fix something? I'm like, I'm good. What are you talking about? And so it caused a lot of friction because I was just full of ego at that point. Sure. But then I guess the combination of my back and knee injury just getting so bad that I just, you know, was in constant pain. And then, you know, the mind tricks that plays on you when it's like, oh, it's not so bad. Granted, I can't get out of a car properly. I can't get in the car properly. I can't stand for too long when I'm teaching. I have to sit down like an old man, and I'm like 31 years old. And it's just like, something's not going well. And then once I had my son, I guess, was I 34? Yeah, around 34, 35. And I just had this flare up that I hadn't had before, where I just couldn't move. And it's not uncommon for people to get, but it freaked me out because I was of the impression that I'm fit, strong, nobody messes with me, like, I got this. And I didn't. I was useless for a week. I was literally stuck in bed, couldn't move, had to get my wife to help me to the bathroom, couldn't take care of my newborn son. And then I remember just staring at the ceiling, being, I gotta be better. I can't be at the park with my kid, and all of a sudden I'm just paralyzed on the ground asking for help. And, you know, my son, like, God knows what he's doing, you know, like, it just, that played in my mind over and over again. And then I didn't want to be a burden. So it was the physical breakdown that made me realize there was also a psychological breakdown. So the first thing I had to do was just work on my body. And once I started working on my body, got a great coach. Shout out to Coach LP, who's still my coach. We just started working from the basics, and he just identifies, like, well, you're weak like a kitten, and like all the spots that you need to be strong, bro. We got to do some really like solid work. Because I was typical like infantry guy, right? I go in the gym, do some bench, do some
some bro
biceps,
lifts. Yeah.
do some bro lifts, do some back squats. All right, we're good. Out. And what it was doing was it was just contributing to my injuries because I was imbalanced. So once I started working on that, the mind follows the body. So then I started being able to kind of get into my head a little bit more and identify things on my own that why am I having these weird, I still don't think it was panic attacks, but it was these massive like bouts of anxiety before I was going into work.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's weird. And then at work, having to like go into a side room and just like do some box breathing to like get my heart rate down before kids came into my class. I'm like, this is weird. I'm like, is this supposed to happen to a teacher? I was like, I don't think so. There's something going on like physiologically here. Like I should start listening to what my body is saying. Can I go on like this for 20 more years? And I realized I'm like, no. So then I reached out to that program I was talking about, which was the Veteran Transition Network, and they were amazing. I didn't know what I was applying to. I thought I was applying to a transition service to help me find new employment.
Oh. Happy accident then. Yeah.
I didn't read well enough. I'm not a details guy.
Yeah.
What it was 3 weekends of group therapy, and I thought that was just like part of the mindset thing. But when they gave me a call after I applied, they're like, hey Dave, you'd be a great candidate and we want to get just a better profile of what you're doing and like how you've been, and and they were asking me all kinds of questions like, have you had any like suicidal ideations? And I'm like, no. And why are you asking me that? They're like, well, there's going to be a lot of group sessions. I'm like, group sessions? And so then I immediately said, oh sorry, this I made a mistake. I shouldn't be taking part of this program. I'm okay. And then the psychologist was like, Dave, we're calling you for a reason. We're a little bit concerned, and we want to really make sure that that there's a spot waiting for you, and we'd really like to have you down. I was like, huh. So then I talked to my wife. She's like, well, like, don't be a dum-dum. This is like the moment. Go get some help. And that was just so eye-opening. We did 3 weekends, and we talked, offline about how you can minimize your experience because you weren't the door kicker.
Right.
You didn't have, yourself knee deep in grenade pins. All these images of what it is to be a warrior in a war zone didn't happen to me. We had some, confrontations. We had, some rounds go overhead. But we didn't have that full on combat, which to me, that would be the moment where you're like, okay, well, yeah, I might have some issues. Mine were related to other things that I didn't expect to happen when I was over there. And that's what I learned when I was doing this program, that it's often the things you're not prepared for that are going to outflank you. And psychologically, they're going to play tricks on your mind. And it's those that you have to start addressing. And, when we did this whole seminar, it was just 6 men and with two counselors, two psychologists, and some veteran helpers, as we call them, that have gone through the program and can help you out at night and stuff like that. Yeah, they walk you through, like they made you walk through and talk through your trauma. And man, the emotions that came out of that, it was just that cathartic kind of moment. And I remember the thing I remember the most, like obviously the whole experience was really emotional and supercharged. But one of my buddies, he was a real sarcastic jackass, right? Like my favorite type of guy. And the whole room is just like, everybody's tearing up. Like they're just like an emotional mess. And he's like, way to go, Dave. You're such a jackass, man. You're the only guy to make everybody, including the freaking psychologist, cry today. Way to go, man. And I was like, all right, cool. Yeah. And so then it was that moment. I was like, oh, wait, no, like I do have some shit that I need to deal with, because like all these other guys are talking about their experiences. And I'm like, whoa, that's heavy. Like, whoa, that's heavy. And then all the other guys are like, dude, you're going through some heavy stuff, man. You got some stuff that you need to work on. And then that was the confirmation I needed.
Yeah.
It
Validated
that I needed to get some help. And it wasn't because like I was, under constant enemy fire or anything like that nature. It was something that was obviously tour related, but it didn't have the same weight until I did that actual 3 days together with experts and other veterans that made me realize like, oh no, I do deserve some help, and still do get some help, which is, allowed me to activate, let's say, and do what I do now. Because if not, I'd be stuck in that God knows what I'd be doing right now.
Yeah. So, a few weeks back we talked to Adrian, and Adrian is a former Force Recon Marine. So, been there, done that, right? And so now he's a mental health professional. He went back to school and got his license to practice counseling. And we talked about just, there's a whole experience that comes within uniform. And some people, we attribute actions as maybe the problems, but sometimes we wanted to do something but couldn't. We wanted to be a part of something but couldn't because of something that was beyond our control. And those things are just as detrimental to us as having to do actions, right? Sometimes it's more troubling to have been in an opportunity to where you needed to squeeze the trigger, but you weren't able to, versus actually having to squeeze the trigger and dealing with that action. And that's something that we largely need to reframe in our head, is that it's not just what you did, it's maybe wanting to and feeling like that was taken from you, feeling as if, you don't know what harm you caused by not being able to squeeze the trigger. And those are the type of things that we take into our life that really spin us up on the inside. And we're supposed to feel some kind of way about it. We're supposed to feel what? We're supposed to feel guilty to squeeze, and we're supposed to feel relieved that we didn't. And if you use that linear thinking, it can twist you up inside, because there's a part of you that knew you were doing the right thing or wanted to do the right thing, but because of something outside of your control, you couldn't. So Adrian he like you, because before we were talking a little bit about, you have an affection for Jordan Peterson, another great Canadian up there. And Adrian uses a Jungian kind of approach. He uses shadow work. So he takes his clients through all of this, unresolved, pent up stuff that can stem from our uniform experiences, because it's an uncomfortable position to be in, to think about, I wanted to end somebody else's life. I feel like that was taken from me. And a lot of veterans may walk this line of feeling this internally and then externally feeling a guilt and a shame, like they shouldn't feel that way. Because that word should and just are just, those two words specifically are just they set people off. Because when you say I should have done this, you're setting an expectation about reality and about the world. And whenever you say the word just, what you're doing is, I just got shot at. Think about that. I just got shot at. Who the hell is that for? Who can relate to that, right? Only a very few amount of people within the uniform can relate to that. So when you use the word just, you're cutting the legs out from underneath you. You're undercutting your own quality of service. And we do that all up and down that veteran continuum, as we talked about. Oh, I just did door kicking in Iraq. Oh, I just did admin. All of those things, you're setting a value about what type of service you had. And that robs you of the pride which you can have that you served, right? So let's talk a little bit about your current baby, the Hard to Kill podcast, right? Because you've had some awesome guests on the Hard to Kill podcast. So run through a brief list of who's been your favorite guests thus far. I know that we've talked to a couple offline, so why don't you share that with us?
All right, it's probably going to be you.
Oh, come
on. We'll see how
flattery,
that goes.
Flattery will get you everywhere.
Oh, man. I am Irish. I got the gift of the gab, man. That's why I do what I do. I kissed the Blarney Stone years ago. It's rubbing off. So, well.
I'm sorry. I don't mean to interrupt you here, but.
Oh, well done, sir.
Yeah,
well done. Well done.
A little Irish roots myself. There you go.
Yeah, right on. Everybody's Irish on St. Patrick's Day. I can't wait.
Of course.
I'm literally Irish, though, not to go off topic, but I literally have citizenship. So
Oh man, that's lovely. Well,
go live there
according
for a while.
to 23andMe, I am literally Northern Irish.
Yeah, so am I. Yeah, that's where my
Okay.
family's from. Yeah, you
Right,
can still get citizenship on the island. So we can have a little side conversation about that,
Yeah,
man.
I will, absolutely.
It's a great way to get European Union citizenship. So we'll see how that goes. The Hard to Kill podcast might be moving to Europe at some point. Who knows? Okay, so the question was guess on the Hard to Kill podcast and how that's going. So I guess the podcast came out of what we're just talking about, that whole healing process. I didn't really know what I needed to do, but there was a part of me that knew I needed to do something, and something radically different, and to focus on the things that I'm actually good at and not try to continually improve the things that I'm crappy at.
Yeah.
And that was all because I listened to some podcasts that just lit me up. And the first podcast I ever listened to was my buddy's, who was a colleague of mine, still a buddy of mine, is a rugby podcast. And I was just, I shit all over him, right? I was like, dude, who are you with a podcast? Like, that's just for nerds and dorks. Nobody listens to podcasts. And he proved me wrong. He has a massive rugby podcast right now. And so I listened to his podcast. Now, I'm not a rugby player. I don't know anything about rugby other than the fact that I would somehow beat him in the rugby pool every year just by blind luck. That's the basic knowledge I have of rugby. So the podcast itself wasn't really that attractive to me, but what was attractive was that he was interviewing people that I wanted to talk to. And I was amazed by the fact that he was taking the time between teaching classes, finding a spare room, recording an episode with some people that I really admired, that I read their books, and I go, who are you talking to? And the one that really clicked with me is Dr. Kelly Starrett, who is the author of The Supple Leopard, which helped me get out of back pain. And I remember distinctly saying, like, who are you just talking to? He's like, oh, I was talking to K-Star. I'm like, what, you're just on like a nickname basis with this guy now? He's like, yeah, he's just on the podcast. He's going to be on next week. And it's like, wait a second. You can just email a guy and talk to them and they'll come on your podcast? He's like, apparently. So that just changed my whole mindset just with that one conversation, because for me, that was like an intangible, but also almost like an impossibility. Like, you can't reach out to people that are New York Times best-selling authors. Like, they've got teams and No, actually, even like they're famous to people that are niched in that world. But ultimately, he's not Brad Pitt. He doesn't have a team. He just has he has a executive assistant, and then you just write a simple email and boom, there you go. And so just that alone introduced me to other podcasts, and I started listening to Joe Rogan, which I thought was, well, because I knew him, he's the Fear Factor guy and the guy that was on Radio City. And I was like, well, okay, he's a comedian, all right. And it was just the first episode, and I can't find it because I have no idea who he was talking to. It was like 6 years ago. And it was just talking about how miserable people are at work. And that really rang true, because I was literally listening to that podcast. I was going to take my my daily freaking pause from like kids asking me questions. I would go to the shitter to kind of like get away from everything. Even if I didn't have to shit, I'd just be like, I'd be like, okay. And so I was listening to the podcast, and he's like, dude, is the best part of your day going into the shitter and like looking at your phone? And I was like, oh my God, is he here with me?
Yeah.
And he's like, if that's the case, you gotta make a change. And it was as weird as that sounds, that is kind of where my brain shifted. And I didn't start the podcast right away. It took me a while because I was still teaching, and I was still planning on, I guess maybe I should get out. I was doing a master's, had a kid, and then the back injury happened and all that stuff.
I love how you just like skipped right over that. Yeah, masters are a big deal. Like, probably a lot of your existential crisis there.
It was. I mean, part of. I mean, the reason why I minimized the masters is only because like that was the old me way of thinking. I was used to a hierarchical system. I think that's how you pronounce it. In the military, where you do more courses, you do more work, you get promoted, you go up the chain of command. I like that system. I know it. It's easy for me. I move my way up because I just showed up and I did okay. I was like, okay, well, therefore that must be the same in teaching. I was like, okay, well, I want to be a principal. Like, I'm done not leading anything here. I'm trying to get things changed, but as a teacher, you have no power. So I was like, except in your classroom, but what's that, right? Like, I'm the king of the 13-year-olds. Awesome. Like, good job, Dave.
Okay.
So I decided to embark on a part-time master's, and it was hard, man. Like, it was, thankfully I didn't have a kid up until my last year. So I was able to work at night and get that all done. But I was still coaching full time. I was still teaching full time. I was still in the military part-time. There was a lot on my plate. So I got that done. But ultimately, it didn't result in me getting anything more in the teaching world, because they didn't recognize it, because I wasn't part of the club. It was just nepotism, right? That got me there. Yeah. People got the job without the qualifications. And I was like,
we call that the good old boy system down here.
Yeah. I'm like, I'm such an idiot. Why did I think that would be the case? And although I'm grateful for doing my master's, because I got to learn obviously a ton. I got to put a paper out there and stuff and work on concussions and stuff that I really wasn't passionate about. Ultimately, I'm now no longer in the teaching field. And it was really the thing that I've grown the most from is podcasting and, my coaching business. And the podcasting was just on a whim. I decided, well, what I'm doing right now isn't working. So how could podcasting, which is completely different, be any harm? Because I'm miserable. I was unemployed at that point. I got fired from a job. I left my teaching career to go take a job at a startup. Worst fit ever. But then I learned, okay, well, before you hop into things, make sure that you listen to your gut and make sure that it's a good fit. Don't just hop into things because the salary's good and you think that, well, this is better than what I had. That's really poor mindset. So naturally I got fired because they're a business. They're like, yeah, dude, this isn't working out. And I was like, yeah, I know it's not working out, but I was just waiting for you to fire me because I wanted to get my freaking 1 month pay. So then that gave me time to work on myself and podcasting, wrote a book, and it started out really like anybody that starts out a podcast. It was grimy. It wasn't great. I was just using a crappy mic from my iPhone. My first episode was with my buddy in his gym, and you hear the fans in the background. You can barely hear us. I was like, if I don't get this done and put it out there, it'll never start. The journey of 1,000 miles starts with one step. Yeah. That was the same principle that I applied. And now, I just published episode 90. The guests I've been able to get have been those that I wanted to talk to for maybe a decade or so. I had Dr. Kelly Starrett. I got him on really early. I got Dr. Kirk Parsley, who's a sleep guru, Navy SEAL, who I've been following for years. I had Commander McCaskill, Navy SEAL, part of Operation Red Wings, come on the podcast, and it's just snowballing. And it's, like I'm here now. Like, these are things that if you were to have told me 4 years ago, hey, you're going to be on podcast and you're going to be talking to so-and-so and you're going to have, thousands of downloads, I would have said, no, you're on crack, man. This doesn't make any sense. Like, it's just, who would want to listen to me?
Yeah. Who am I? Yeah.
Speak into a mic and into the ether and then have some downloads that aren't my mom and my wife, it's just, and that's the beauty of podcasting. You just don't know, but the longer you stick at it and the better you get at the craft. And to echo what you said, like you mentioned Jordan Peterson, he was really influential too, because basically, like I'm paraphrasing, but he says, if you're able to speak well and with brevity and with emphasis on the point that you're trying to make, like that's a superpower. And I said, you know what, that's true. I'm not uncomfortable talking in front of people. I can talk to a group of people. Actually, I feel great when I do that, but it's just the way I speak. I haven't perfected that. And that's where podcasting has helped me really be able to, and I'm starting to stumble on my words now, ironically, at the point where I'm trying to convey my most important point.
Me talk good now.
Yeah, I speak
much better.
Good now. But to just bring up why this is important during this past summer, as anybody that was in the military that served in Afghanistan or any of the wars on terror, the pullout from Afghanistan was just complete debacle. Here in Canada, we had zero plan. So I got on the internet and put out a video and said, this is unacceptable for the following reasons. We need help. We need to fix this now. And it just blew up. And a lot of my military network saw it. They said, yeah, let's get on board. And then it was one interview after another, sometimes 4 interviews a day in English and in French. Why are you doing this? What are the implications? What's the next steps, et cetera, on national, regional, all types of news, radio, live, you name it. And the reason why I kept on getting called back was because I was able to convey a message very clearly and not pull any punches. And that I attribute all to practicing on podcasts. So that's where, being able to convey a message and practice on a medium like this ends up honing your superpower. So
yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's funny how I kind of felt the same way. I was getting really hypercritical of my first few episodes that I recorded. I don't know if I'll put this out. I don't know if I'll put this out. And then I just had one little bit of encouragement from a buddy. I said, he's somebody I trust from the uniform. And I said, look, man, will you take a few minutes and check this out? Tell me what you think. And he said, this is awesome, man. It was some of the best shit I have ever heard. And I know he's being a little biased because he's my buddy, but because we were talking about mental health content that was relatable, that people could go oh shit, I went through that, or oh man, I see that in myself. He said, man, it feels like you've tapped into something. Because he and I have talked a lot. So we've had these kind of conversations for hours, for years now. And so it was just kind of like me talking to him. And that's what he said, man, this is something that's going to help a lot of us out there. And that little bit of encouragement was all I needed to just go ahead and say, all right, well, hell, I'll put it out no matter how terrible the quality is.
There you go.
And then what I noticed is, to your point, is our community is so hungry to hear good information from credible speakers, because there's just so much noise out there. And as soon as somebody feels like you've got something to offer and you're talking about something from a fresh perspective, they'll just explode on it. They'll tell their people about it, and it grows really quickly. And to your point, that back in August, there was just so much raw energy and emotion around that pullout. And I'm not an Afghan veteran, so I have largely been quiet about it because it's not my area. It's not, I don't have any skin in the game there. But I just remember feeling the hurt that all my brothers and sisters who were in that area, that AOR, how it was palpable. And just anybody saying this is a failure in any capacity, it resonated with people. And I know it wasn't an easy thing for anybody to do. I'm not passing any judgment. It was a difficult, but I'm from the Persian Gulf, AOR, we felt pretty similar when Iraq fell. It's just we put a lot of our effort into that arena, and it was just what do you do with that? But yeah, so I know we're running up here on the hour mark, but I know that you should talk about your business as well, because you're doing coaching, and that's a really important element, because as we talked with Corbett a couple months back now, physical activity is really important to the healing process as well. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I touched on it before where I couldn't really move and my back was all jammed up, and I realized I had to make a change. And the biggest change was obviously working on the deficiencies that I didn't know I had. I didn't know what I didn't know. So my coach helped with that big time. So I got a bigger appreciation for coaching.
Yeah.
And then I really started trying to understand, well, how does the human body move and how do you heal it? Because I firmly believe that we are just healing machines given the right conditions. So the movement stuff all came down to foam rolling. It's called self-myofascial release. That's what we call it in the biz.
Yeah.
But grabbing a foam roller, grabbing a lacrosse ball, grabbing a tennis ball, whatever. The reason why massage works is because you're alleviating that tension in certain parts of the body that need to be alleviated so that you can actually move your joints properly. So I learned about that, and that's where Dr. Kelly Starrett comes into play. And I just devoured all of his stuff. I looked at all his videos, and I became, a self-trained expert because I was using those movements and those exercises every day, because I realized, just going to physio, just going to chiro, just going to osteo isn't enough. The point is, it's like going to school. learn a lesson from your teacher is step 1. Step 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 is going and hitting the books after, and then coming back, asking questions and studying and getting better. That's education. So I needed the education. I needed to train my body to start moving better again. So therefore I could be in less pain. And that was just boom. That was the mind opening moment that led me to start helping others that were either young and didn't want to get injured, or those who are already injured and that wanted to feel better. So it really started with a troop at my unit that was just really keen on joining what we call the close protection teams here. So it's basically a soft, not a tier 1 soft role, but it's still a soft role. And so he wanted to get on those teams. He was young. He was, full of piss and vinegar. He's like, yeah, Dave. He's like, I want you to train me. I'm like, well, I don't you want me to train you? Okay. I was a personal trainer, but I really didn't have a business going. He's like, I'll pay you. Okay, bro. So I put together a really good program, and then he's eventually made it onto those teams, which is really awesome. But then he started talking to his buddies. Hey, why don't you get Dave to train you? So then just out of nothing, business kind of started to appear. And I thought that's interesting. And it was all online too. I wasn't really going face to face to do anything. And I thought that was kind of novel. And then I did a seminar at one of our regiments here. One of my friends is the sergeant major. So he's like, yeah, come on and do a thing on a weekend. He's like, well, we'll pay you and we'll go from there. I was like, okay, cool. So I came in, did a day of training. And then I just asked in the after action report, hey, what was your favorite lesson? And they all said, oh, the stuff that you did with the foam rollers and stuff, so that we don't get shin splints and our backs are good after, a ruck march and stuff. And I go, okay, well, tell you what, I'll write up just a quick PDF that everybody can refer to, and you can share with your buddies and do what you want with it. As I was writing, I realized I needed a little bit more context. So 4 would turn into 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And then eventually 90 pages of context. So I said, well, I guess I've got a book here. So this isn't really a PDF file anymore. This is more of a book. So I came up with a name, the Nimble Warrior.
Ooh, snappy title.
Yeah. Well, nimbleness, I explained in my book, but it's essentially, my dad's sarcastic too. And he would always make fun of my mom that would, moan getting out of a chair, and he'd be like, nimble like a cat. And so it always stuck in the back of my mind. So because I was always kind of, after I got injured, I was making old man sounds, and I was like, man,
I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah. I was like, man,
as I have to readjust 5 times as we're saying.
So that book, coupled with the training programs, I really wanted the veteran community, especially because we're all pretty banged up. It's a tough job, no matter what job you had. It's hard on the body. So your knees, your back, your hips, etc. So my business really focuses on the veteran and the military community, first responders too, because they get beat up a lot too. But mainly I work with military veterans, and we work on the basics to getting you moving better, but also through that movement leading to the point where you can actually, be a more productive human being and just be a more savage human being in your communities. Because it's my personal belief that the veteran community that was created during the war on terror is like the next greatest generation. And we just need to be able to thrive. And that's what I've noticed was lacking, is that we have here in Canada all the psychological services, and we can go get, treatments for our back and knees, but there's none of that. There's nothing in between. So yeah, you might feel a little bit better after a treatment, and yeah, you might feel a little bit better after your psychological therapy, but the problem is it's like there's no coaching as to how to get better and thrive from there. So although there's not an overwhelming majority of people that are in that boat, I just wanted those that were trying to get better, and those that wanted that extra push to have a medium to do so. And so my goal is really to change the health paradigm for veterans here and across the planet, just so that we can be better and thrive in our communities. And that's essentially it, man. That's been my raison d'etre, using my French here from Montreal, for starting the company and pushing forward for the last 3 years.
Oh, well, yeah, no, I mean, that's a fascinating story. I think you may have to immigrate to the United States at some point, because you're
I'd love to. I'd love to,
You're,
man. I'm done with Canada, man. I'm the most
Yeah.
patriotic Canadian that doesn't want to live here anymore. There's a lot of us like that now. So yeah, we've been looking hard to figure out a new place to migrate to. I think you're going to see a lot of Canadians moving down to the States or elsewhere in the next coming few weeks and years, I think.
I just meant our customer base for something like that is much higher.
No kidding.
Yeah, we have like 7 to 8% of the U.S. population is prior service. So that's, as you knew on the spot the other day when we were talking, it's like over 20 million, 22 million, something like that. So yeah, lots of people, lots of aching bodies down here, man.
Yeah, there you go. I'll start airdropping books just over like entire states. Just
yeah. Hey, I mean, honestly, we need an integrative approach to a lot of things. You're right. Single events or single modes of treatment are not really as effective as using a cumulative approach,
right.
a complete integrative care team where you can go to physical doctors and mental health doctors, and like those efforts can interact in a synergistic effect to treat the whole person, not just individual systems. So yeah, I think that's the future. It definitely seems to be the VA down here's approach, that they're trying to integrate a bunch of different professionals into one care team. Mm-hmm. So I definitely think that's on the way. Yeah.
To speak to that point, it was the research that I've read from your own VA that inspired me to create our new program, which just got picked up, I guess, not directly, but it's been funded by our own VA. So, but it's only for women, retired women from the CAF right now. But my goal is for it to spread to the entire population of veterans here in Canada, and hopefully be able to bring that concept and that online program to the States, the UK, wherever, because we're able to just provide a service and provide a coaching that is just not being done right now, and the results we're getting are incredible. And we're also in the middle of an actual university study to prove out the statistical significance of the benefit of being on that course. So we're hoping to get some really interesting insights by the end of this year, and we'll definitely be hearing a little bit more from our Athena program here in Canada.
Yeah, well, definitely keep us posted. Whatever information you need to disseminate down here to our little corner of the universe down here in the United States, I will absolutely do whatever I can to spread the good word. So, thank you. Is there anything else that you feel like we need to get to today, or I guess we should probably tell some people where to find you.
Where to find me? Yeah, that's always a good. I always forget. I had to make it super simple for myself, because I'm not really a millennial, but I'm not really a Gen Xer either.
Wait, how old are you?
I'm 40. So.
Oh, well, I'm 37, man. We're still millennials.
We're still kind of millennials.
We're elder millennials.
We're elder. Yeah. When people, exactly. Like if I wear my hat backwards and like wear some baggy pants, maybe I don't even know what millennials do anymore. I'd probably do the opposite. It's probably like skinny jeans, and I don't know. So I don't fit in anywhere.
But there's Gen Z now behind us as well.
Is that who's behind us?
Yeah. So
they were born like 1990, I guess.
No, they're born like 90. I think it's 96 and above.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So I mean, So I have to keep things simple, because all my handles, people ask me, hey, what's your Twitter handle? Crap. What's your Instagram handle? So I just made it really simple. If you go to davemorrow.net.
Oh,
so
okay.
I can't forget that.
Everything's on davemorrow.net.
So if you go to davemorrow.net, you can find training programs, you can find the podcast, you can find the blog, you can find, you name it, my links to Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all there. Super easy to find what you need from there. And my email is there too. You can shoot me a message. Mostly I'll respond to things like Instagram and Facebook. And yeah, I'm online, so there's no reason why you can't reach out and join our Facebook group. We've got plenty of Americans already in our group, sharing their knowledge and sharing their perspectives from, you know, their time in the service. And we also have an international community. We've got Brits and we got Aussies and we've got those from Dutch Armed Forces. So we're building a little community here of international warriors, and it's always great to have as many as possible sharing their experiences and showing some gains, hitting the gym, doing some deadlifts, man. I love when guys post videos of deadlifts. It just fires me up to go do some more. So yeah, you can go to davemorrow.net and find all the information there.
That sounds perfect. Well, if you've enjoyed hearing this conversation with Dave today, and I know I have, please do us a favor and spread the word to all the people in your social sphere, because largely what we do here hinges upon people spreading the word about conversations we have here with Vet with a Mic, because there's a lot of cool things that are happening in the veteran community. And as we are so painfully aware, there's a lot of negative noise out there. It's what we're trying to counteract here at Vet with a Mic. If there's an episode that you would like to see come to fruition here at Vet with a Mic, please reach out to me on all the social medias, of course, or you can reach me at ryan@vetwithamic.com. And in saying that, however life finds you, hope life finds you well. Till next time.